As part of administering a Windows Server 2003 machines, it might become necessary to add additional disk storage. In this exercise, we'll look at the steps that are required to set up a new disk for use in Windows Server 2003. The best tool for the job is the Disk Management tool, and you can access it by right-clicking on the My Computer icon and selecting the Manage option. Click on Disk Management to view all the disk information about your local system. On this server, I've actually got two physical disks, one approximately 40 gigabytes and one approximately 30 gigabytes. On the first physical disk, I've got two partitions, one running Windows XP and one running Windows Server 2003, which we're running right now. I've also configured a second physical disk, and in this case the disk has not yet been formatted. You'll notice that the disk is currently configured as a basic disk. The first step that we want to perform is to convert this disk to a dynamic disk. So to do that, I'm going to right-click on the physical disk item and choose Convert to Dynamic Disk. The dialog box will show me all the disks that are on the system that are currently configured as basic disks. In this case, I have two physical disks, disk 0 and disk 1, that are configured as basic disks. For the sake of this exercise, I'm just going to convert disk 1. So I'll select that option and click OK. Within a few seconds, you'll notice that our basic disk, this physical disk 1, has been converted to a dynamic disk. Now before we can actually use this disk to store information, we actually have to allocate some of the unallocated space. To do this, I'll right-click on the unallocated space and choose New Volume. This starts the New Volume wizard, which is going to walk us through the steps of actually allocating the space and assigning a drive letter. To begin, I'll click Next. Since I've selected only a single disk, and there's only a single disk that has unallocated space to use, the only option that's available for the type of volume is Simple. However, if I had multiple areas of unallocated space, I could create a spanned, striped, mirrored, or even a RAID 5 volume. So in this case, we'll go ahead and keep the default selection of Simple and click Next. Next, we're on the Select Disk step. On this step, we need to specify which unallocated disk space will be used in the new Simple volume. In this case, since the volume is a simple volume, we can only specify a single physical disk. That's because we also only have one area of unallocated space on the system. However, we can specify that we don't want to use all of the available disk space. For example, I could create a 10 gigabyte simple partition. However, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and choose to use all of the available space on disk 1, and I'll click Next to continue. Next, we need to decide how we want to assign a drive letter and or a path to this disk. The various options are to assign a specific drive letter, which is available in the list of letters that are in this drop-down list, or we can choose to mount it in a following NTFS folder. By using a mount point, for example, we could change our C:\data folder to actually redirect to this new volume that we're creating. Finally, the last option is to not assign either a drive letter or a drive path. For the sake of this exercise, we're going to choose to assign a drive letter. I've chosen the drive letter of D, and I'll click Next to continue. Next, we need to specify how we want to format this volume. So you can choose to actually leave this new simple volume as unformatted. However, in that case, it would not be available for use. In our case, we want to format the volume. The options include the file system, and in this case, since we've created a dynamic disk, the only option available is NTFS. For basic disks, you can format it using the FAT file system. We can also change the allocation unit size, but in general, the recommendation is to leave it at the default. Finally, we'll give a volume label. I'll go ahead and call this User Data. You can also choose a couple of other options, for example, to perform a quick format or to enable file and folder compression for this volume. I'll go ahead and choose Next to continue. And finally, I'll be seeing the completing the new volume wizard options. And this shows me all of the selections that I've made so far. To actually format the disk and create the new volume, I'll click the Finish button. And within a few seconds here, you'll see that the disk will start formatting. The actual amount of time that it takes for the disk to format could range from a few minutes to a half hour or more, depending on the size of storage, the type of volumes you're creating, and the actual performance of your hardware. Once the disk is finished formatting, I'll be able to access it using the drive letter that I've specified. So in this case, I'll have a new partition called D. I'll be able to store user data or any other information that I want on that disk. As you can see, through the use of the disk management tool, it's very quick and simple to set up a new disk for use in Windows Server 2003.